Let's have a look at Parashas Toldos. Now, what I want to do when we give a Parashas Shir is not just focus on a few nice bits, but try to see what's the overall dynamic of the section that we call a Sedra. Now, there's a premise involved here that's very important to uncover or to expose straight away. And that premise is that Sedras are actual units of collective information. That is to say that obviously the Torah was given originally, and at some point it was divided to make an annual reading. We know probably the original divisions go very deep into Second Temple by Sheni period. There was alternative ways of doing the divisions of the Sedras, breaking them into even finer pieces. Right now, Yisrael was typical to finish every 3 years, the Torah, not every year. But the minhag of all Yisrael is now to do what they did in Babylon and Bavel, which is to finish it annually. But what that means is these were not divided along random division points, but along natural fault lines in the text that lend themselves to complete something. So although the Torah is flowing, there are natural potential stopping points that mean we should be able to notice the beginning of a Sedra and the end, what has changed. And sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes it's less obvious. Like Bereishis obviously ends at Noach, Noach ends at Avraham, and so on. But sometimes it's not as obvious. Now, an interesting thing is the name Toldos. The minhag of all Yisrael and Chazal uses the name for the Sedra is Toldos, right, which means something like offspring or product. And it's not so obvious it should be called Toldos. You say, yes it is, it's Eila, Toldos, Yitzchak, ben Avraham. Most Sedras are named after the first prominent word that appears in the first pasuk. But it's not true, because we've already had a Sedra that began with the words Eila, Toldos. And that's Noach. So it's interesting that you'd have thought if Toldos is the reason to call a Sedra a name, call that one Toldos. Wait for this one, you're stuck, you can't call it Toldos, you call it Yitzchak. Right? That's how we're going to... And presumably the point is that somehow the Sedra of Noach is about Noach. This Sedra is not about Yitzchak per se, it's about Toldos. Right? And that's what we want to really understand. Now this phrase Eila Toldos is actually one that really has dominated the entire book of Bereishis. It first appears straight after the 7 days of creation. We literally have, if you turn back to Bereishis chapter 2, pasuk 4, base Dalet, Eila Toldos HaShamayim V'Haaretz B'Hibaram. These are the products, in that case we would use, of heaven and earth when he created them. Then, if you carry on further in the Bereishis, when we get to the end after the Cain Hevel story, chapter 5, Perek Hey, bottom page 22, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. This is now the book of the offspring, or product, same word of Adam. And all the way through now, Bereishis is really just punctuated by structured along the lines of these Toldos. Noach is Eila Toldos Noach, page 30, right? That's in the non-Jewish chapters, chapter 6, number 9, verse 9. At the end of that, you have, after the story of Noach, when you have Eila Toldos B'nei Noach, these are the Toldos of the children of Noach, that's chapter 10, right? And so everything really just goes through that way. Toldos Shem, right? Products of Shem. We have, then we have, interestingly enough, well, what we then get is, of course, the story of we had the end of Chayesara that told us Yishmael. Now we're getting the Toldos Yitzchak. And that's going to continue. We're going to have all the genealogy of Esau. We're going to have the Toldos Yaakov, which will famously open with the story of Yosef and so on. So the whole Bereishis is really a set of Toldos, or episodes that begin, Eila Toldos this, Eila Toldos this. These are the offspring, these are the products, this is what's going on. But this is the part that's called Toldos, and which is, when we think about it, when we reflect upon it, it's actually very fitting, because the entire, or the dominant issue of the Sedra we're going to read, which is really the birth of Yaakov and Esav, and then the selection of Yaakov, who first gets the birthright and later on gets the blessings, that is going to be a question of who is the Tolda of Yitzchak ben Avraham. So we're going to really, Tolda meaning who is the legitimate offspring? Who is the one who's going to continue what they began? Up till now, there's always been a natural reason to prefer when there's a choice between children. In the case of Avraham and his brothers, only one even chose to have the relationship with God. That's Avraham made it his mission. When it came to Yishmael and Avraham, they have different mothers. They're not the same. In fact, they even have slightly different fathers, in that the person who gives birth to Yishmael is called Avram, and his name is changed. He's Avraham, who gives birth to Yitzchak. So But here, they have exactly the same father, they have exactly the same mother, they're brought up in exactly the same home, they're brought up at exactly the same time, they're born together, and therefore the distinction that needs to be drawn is going to be much more acutely sensitive to what it is that is in fact the nature of Toldos, of offspring, in the sense that deserves both the concept called birthright and the concept called blessing. Now, very important, we are used to thinking of birthright, bechorah, in terms of a financial benefit. The primary difference between being firstborn or not in Torah, by the time the Torah is finished, is really just a double portion. That's it. Earlier in the Torah, that doesn't seem to be it. It seems that it was meant to be priesthood. And that is to say that every firstborn was meant to be a Kohen, it was meant to be a priesthood. That got lost at the golden calf. So bechorah, and this the Rishonim bring out, there's a big discussion on exactly in the sale of the birthright, how you can sell a birthright. If you were selling a financial right for position of birth, you couldn't sell it. I mean, maybe you could actually, you could pre-sell, but it's a question halacha if you can pre-sell something that doesn't come in, what happens if it wasn't meant? But when we say vayivaz Esav es bechorah, Esav rejects and despises it. It's unlikely he would have despised the financial benefit. Although the Ibn Ezra does suggest that Yitzchak was poor at this point, so he thought, who cares? Okay, but the Ramban points out it's difficult to fully justify. So what he must be despising is not a financial arrangement. That's not in the world at this stage, but a role or a position. Particularly the role of something like kahuna, priesthood, which in Torah is not like in a lot of the ancient world. It's meant to be about privilege, it's actually meant to be about responsibility. He didn't want that. Okay, but the big question is going to be, fine, so that's going to be an issue. The issue of the blessings is going to become a major issue because he wants them. And in fact, Yitzchak wanted to give him the blessing, and that's very much a blessing that is the continuation of Avraham's blessing, Bereishis Avraham. And yet Rivka wants Yaakov. So we're going to have to come back to that. Another thing just to consider in terms of laying out the trajectory of the discussion, or the topology of the discussion, is although the Sedra begins with first of all the fact that it's through prayer that Rivka becomes pregnant, she herself is confused by the pregnancy, goes to ask Hashem, right, which Chazal tell us, and Rashi brings it, means shame. That's an interesting aside, it's an interesting question why she didn't ask Avraham, her father-in-law. Okay, leave that to the side. But she goes to Hashem. She gets back this message that this, at least, I mean, there's different ways to understand it, but there's actually two nations in her womb. This is not a regular pains of pregnancy. She's experiencing something cosmic that is going to define the next millennia of history. This is all happening within her right now. And then all the way through, we read about their birth, we read about their aging, we read about the sale of the birthright. And then we have a famine, and Yitzchak and Rivka go to Avimelech in Gerar, and this time, and as usual, they say, well, we're brother and sister, that's been done before by Avram twice already, right? And this time they're a bit more careful. Avimelech, I remember the last time this family came in here and said something about brothers and sisters, and you believed them in it. So he spies on them, determines that it was in fact, they're really husband and wife, and says, somebody catastrophic things could have happened, and then there's a whole quarrel between them about the wells, and in the end, Hashem promises it's like he's going to get born. It's not immediately obvious what that episode is doing over here. Then we have Esav going to marry, we read discussion about his wives, and they're causing problems, and then Yitzchak's old, Yitzchak's getting blind, and he wants to give the blessings. And the famous story over here where as a blind man, he wants to bless Esav, and Rivka says, no, it's a terrible idea. And as Esav's out hunting, she puts on Esav's clothes onto Yaakov, prepares the food, brings it in, he gets the bracha. Yitzchak is a little clearly trying to determine who's in front of me. Hakol kol Yaakov, the voice is Yaakov, the Yadayim b'deis of the hands of Esav. He gives him the bracha. Esav comes back in. Yitzchak seems to reaffirm the bracha, gives Yaakov another bracha. Esav says that any bracha, in between Esav says that anything left for me, I can't yet, please something. He basically gives him a bracha that every time your brother slips, you can dominate him, which again has enormous ramifications across history. And that's where, and then Esau wants to kill Yaakov. Rivka says this is a terrible situation. Tells Yaakov, sends Yaakov, gets Yitzchak to send Yaakov off to Padan Aram. Really her intention is he should look for a wife from her family. And Esau sees that, that this is, the wives he's married are bad in his parents' eyes, and that's it. Okay, and then he goes to Ishmael to marry somebody Fine. So we've certainly got the issue of who's a Toldo dominating this. I want to point out, before we start going a little bit further and trying to really unravel this, what's happening over here, there's many questions that are going to be asked on the Sedra, right? We're full of questions. But I want to talk about one or two of the thematic questions. Okay, we do need to understand what it is that at the pivotal moment makes Yitzchak seem to choose Yaakov. Because as he's exploring and poking and trying to understand, are you really Esav? You don't sound like Esav. You sound like Yaakov. And then when we try and, as he shifts from that seeming doubt into, seeming certainty, I think we're on page 138 over here. If I even just to go a bit below the bottom of page 136, the bottom of page chapter 27, Chafei, or Chafdalet, after having asked, he says, the pasuk before says, he doesn't recognize him because his hands are like Esav, Siros, they're goat hairs or they're hairy, or he blesses him, and then he says, Atozeh b'ni Esav, you my son Esav, he says, I am. Hagishli, come here, let me eat from the food of my son, that my soul should bless you. So he gives him, brings him drink, he drinks, and then Yitzchak, his father, says, come, let me kiss you. And then over the page he says, Vayigash, he comes over, Yishak, like he kisses him, Vayorach es reach begodov, he smells the scent of his garments, Vayavaracheh, when he blesses him, Vayomen, he says, Re'ei reach b'ni, see the scent of my child is Kareach hasadeh sheberach Hashem, like the garden of the field that God has blessed. And he gives him the whole bracha over here. So interestingly enough, one bit earlier, he's still trying to work out who is he, and then somehow come near, let me eat, and this amazing sense seems to be central to it. But even before then, when he says Akol kol Yaakov yadayim de Esav, and the next passage he doesn't recognize him, but he does. He doesn't. What about saying Kol kol Yaakov, the voice of Yaakov, the hands of Esav, helps him recognize him? When we go into the details and we look at Rashi in particular, and the Medrash that Rashi quotes, we have another dimension of problems here. What is the Kol Yaakov, the voice of Yaakov? What does it mean, the voice of Yaakov? Simple level is, you sound like Yaakov. That's certainly plausible. Rashi is possibly bothered by, if it was that big a giveaway, he'd know who he was, but presumably their voice had some similarity. And Rashi says, no, it's already given to us in the text. Because Shemadaber Beloshan Tachanunim, he speaks very nicely. Kumna. Please get up. Right? Yaakov says, please get up. Now, presumably what that means is that Yaakov always spoke very nicely to his father. Esau never spoke nicely to his father. Esau wouldn't say please. And as he says, our Esau's Lashon Kantori is harsh language. Yokumovi, get up, my dad. Now, it's not just in this episode. It must be that's how they always spoke to one another. They both had your hands up there, so go on, yeah?
I was just going to say, you also used like Hashem, Esau would never...
Oh, right. That's also brought correct, 100%. Yeah, the word Hashem as well. But it was interesting about the pleasant talk, which seems to be the way, at least according to Rashi, that he differentiated. We also, what did you want to ask?
I just had a cute idea about Yaakov's midos. I just was looking to share to that point.
Okay.
Avram is Chesed, Yitzchak's Gevora. Avram's gentle, Yitzchak's a man. You get gentle and man together, you get gentleman. And Yaakov is a gentleman.
Thank you.
So he says, please, he has manners.
Okay, we like that. The problem is this. The problem is that that we know throughout. Rashi brings this many times, and in midrashim like this, and the Gemara, Reb Shimon bar Yochai, nobody ever served their father like Esau did. Right? We'll see it later on. Yaakov will be afraid. One of the reasons he'll be afraid when he wants to come back to Canaan, he's afraid that Esau has a merit he doesn't have the way he served his father. And in fact, the Midrashim emphasize this point in many different ways, literally to the point where Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says nobody served like Esau. Esau wore royal clothes when he served his father. I mean, this was his mitzvah. So if he is the great respecter of his father, the great person who does kibbud of the mitzvah more than anyone else, then why would the father assume that Yaakov is the one who speaks nicely to him? Or let's put it differently. If Yaakov is always speaking nicely and Esau isn't, then why do we say that Esau is the one who honored his father more? Sounds like Yaakov did. There seems to be a contradiction.
Can't it just be a cultural thing? Like how you talk?
It could be cultural, it's possible, but remember they grew up in the same culture, they grew up in the same home.
Right.
So there must be something more going on than we're just used to. Like, you could say, let's say, a British person, an American, they talk differently. But here, if they've grown up in the same home and one has developed this cultural way of talking to their father, it means one has a psychological sense of a respect for their father. Seemingly, Yaakov has something about his father that he talks to in a nicer way than Esau does. You may want to say, Yaakov had developed into a more gentle personality generally. Is that what you're trying to say? Maybe he just generally spoke to people nicely. Is that what you'd suggest?
Maybe one's it's not a lack of his respect for his father, just that's how he acts.
Could be. Okay, good. Let's see. The other interesting medrash is on the smelling the scent of the garment. Rashi actually says it. He says, there's nothing worse than a goat's hide you just put on him. Oh, it smells so beautiful. And the garden that Hashem blessed sounds like Gan Eden. Like, what are we talking about? And he says, no, it really is. It's actually the scent of the Garden of Eden came in. That Hashem. Now, why would that be? So that could be some kind of spiritual thing. It could also be that there's actually a medrash that says that this was actually the clothing of Adam himself, interestingly enough. Adam had a certain clothing, it had been passed down, and Nimrod had it, and Esav had gone and killed Nimrod, and he had these. Whichever way we're going to understand it, there's something intriguing about it, to the point where Midrashim want to really try and sense what's happening here. And remember that Hebrew is written without vowels. The Sefer Torah is written without vowels. And Midrashim often will pick on a word, especially if it's a bit anomalous or a bit strange in some sense, and look at what are the other possible readings. And here they do this with the word begadav, his clothing. It can also be read bogdav, his traitors. Now, what do you mean smelling the traitors? But it means somehow, like, smell is the most discerning sense we have. It's the one where you literally don't have to be able to see the thing, to be able to detect almost at a molecular level what's going on over there. And he's sensing something in Yaakov. And in fact, amazingly, the Medrash says, this is Bogdav, the traitors, like Yosef Meshisa. What's the story of Yosef Meshisa? So here we're actually in a great position because we're opposite Rabbi, it's opposite the Temple Mount. And we are roughly where the Jews were as the Temple Mount was being destroyed on Tisha B'Av 2,000 years ago. But what they did, the Romans, because remember when they destroyed it, there were still plenty of Jewish defenders sitting up here on the what's now the Jewish quarter. And they wanted to really dishearten them and rub salt in their wounds and make them give up. So they took a person who was a known traitor of the Jews, there were plenty of them, and one was called Yosef Meshisa. And they took him and offered him to take something out of the temple treasures. And the whole story is given that he came out with a menorah. They counted up and they said, that you can't have, that one, we need to keep that one. We need something to put on the Arch of Titus, we need this gigantic gold thing, we're not letting you take that, but you can take a smaller thing. But then something happens, and he says to them, I can't do it. Somewhere between walking in there the first time and coming out, something's hit him. It's awakened something and it was triggered something, and he can't take anything for the Beis HaMikdash. And they say to him, they're starting to feel a bit embarrassed because they see the spectacle, everyone's watching from the mountain, and all of a sudden the tide's turning. This is like a man who's not going to take something. So they're trying to encourage him with tax breaks, and they see he's not going to do it. He's not going to take financial reward for going in, and they start threatening to punish him. And they basically torture him, and he still refuses. And he cries, he says, woe to me that I annoyed my Creator once, I can't do it again, and he's killed in the process of torture. But what it did for everybody up here, it became so compelling to them that it became a narrative that was transmitted even after woods, and it's now part of our midrashic, our Akeida text. So this was but this they're linking back in here. They want to link the point of origin to this moment when Yitzchak is discerning something within Yaakov. But why should that be the reason to bless him? You're going to have traitors, but they're not going to be that bad. So we need to fully get to grips with what the midrashim are doing here. Let's point out something else before we try and approach or answer some of these questions. And some of the problems with this Sedra will become only clearer when we learn later Sedras. Certain things here become clearer in Vayetze, in Vayishlach. But, so Mitzvah Hashem, if we're able to do this in future weeks, we'll be able to really unravel more. But let's just observe one or two more things. There's something very intriguing about this Sedra, and about where it begins and ends. And that is that almost everybody is introduced in a relationship that is redundant, or that we already know. For example, Eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram. These are the products of Yitzchak, son of Avram. Now we already know Yitzchak is the son of Avram, but it gets even worse because the Apostle then says, Avram holy is Yitzchak. Now Rashi brings different pasuk, And then Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Rivka, daughter of Besuel, the Aramean from Patan Aram. We know all this. Achos Lavan, sister Lavan. We've had that twice already in the Torah. The end of Vayera and all the way, the whole negotiation last week. Like, does the Torah think we've forgotten who they are? Why have we got? So Rashi explains each one's emphasizing a certain point, but it carries on all the way. You're going to see this again and again and again in the Sedra. Let's just find a few examples. Let's just take an example from right towards the last part of here. Let's take a look at this. Start from page 134. So Yitzchak vayikra es Esav, he calls Esav Benoi Hagadol, his older son. Hello, do we not like? I know he's the older son. Just he calls Esav. We read just a few psukim earlier that Esav was born first. Vayomalav, he says Bini, my son. He says I'm here. He says I'm getting old, etc., etc. Okay, fine. Now pasuk hey, Rivka shemas. Rivka hears B'daber Yitzchak el Esav when Yitzchak speaks to Esav, Beno, his son. What are you doing? Just right. Okay, fine. Then Rivka says, pasuk vav el Yaakov to Yaakov, Beno, her son. Why? Everyone's being introduced in a relation which we already know, right? Hine, I've heard your father. Listen to this. Hine shamati Esav, I've heard your father. Medaber speaking el Esav to Esav, Achicha, your brother. I don't know if you know, but Esav is actually your brother. Just in case you didn't know that, let me just re-emphasize that point. And so he goes, and everybody's doing this in the Sedra. And then Pasuk Yudalef, Yaakov says, Al Rivka Imoi, to Rivka, his mother. Phew, just in case why is the Torah doing this? It's clearly deliberate. Hein Esav Achi, behold Esav, my brother, is a man of hair. Right? Look what's going on. Maybe my father will tell me, then fine, then there'll be curse, etc. And so this is how it goes on. She says, Alai kiloscha bini, upon me will be your curse, my son. Right? And this is unbelievable all the way through. Look at this. Pasuk Tazvav. V'tikach Rivka as big day Esav. Rivka took the clothes of Esav. Just to want to say that's the way people spoke. But not now. Rivka. This is the Torah, the narrating. That Rivka took the clothes of Esav. But not her older son. Why? It's clearly deliberate. This is all the way, right? It's not the standard thing. And she gave it. Valtilba. She put it on as Yaakov, her son. But not Hakoton, her son, the younger son. Right. All this, and so it goes on. In fact, it gets so extreme that when it look Vayom Yaakov it's all the way through, but it gets so extreme that it gets right to the end. You can actually trace this all yourself. Let me just find the pasuk over here. There's the pasuk here. Says I've lost it where it says this has something. Rivka aim Yaakov Esav, the mother of Yaakov and Esav. And let me just find where that. Do you know whether whoever finds that pasuk, I'll have a look for it. Yes, here it is. It's pasuk right in the very end of the Sedra. Perek Chav Ches. Pasuk A. Vayishlach Yitzchak as Yaakov. Yitzchak sends Yaakov. Vayelech, and he went Padan Aram to Padan Aram. El Lavan ben Besuel ha'Arami, to Lavan son of Besuel the Aramean. Achi Rivka, who's the brother of Rivka, in case we didn't know that one. Aim Yaakov Esav, who is the mother of Yaakov and Esav. By the way, you'll notice the Sedra is ending more or less the way it began. We had that right at the beginning. But and look at what Rashi says over here on Pasuk A. There's an amazing Rashi. I do not know what this is coming to teach us. Rashi's finally given up. It's an amazing thing. Like what are we? He's all the way through Sedra shown, but there is usually some point you could see in the emphasis. Here we can't, which seems to mean that it may not have a specific explanation, although we could think about the possibilities. But it certainly is emphasizing to us that there is no way we can escape the odd, perpetual theme that's running all the way through the Sedra from beginning to end, of this constant emphasis of who is what to whom, even though it's obvious that we already know that information. It's not adding information we didn't know. Okay, before we get to work on putting all this together, let's observe one last thing, which is the entire episode of the brachos, of the blessings. There's two more things to observe actually. The second, I'll get to the entire episode of blessings. The other thing to notice is the centrality of Rivka in this whole story. although overtly the prime movers often seem to be Yitzchak, in fact all the action's really happening at the level of Rivka over here. Okay, so Yitzchak is davening and it's just about Rivka. But she's the one who's struggling with the pregnancy. She goes and asks Hashem. She doesn't ask Yitzchak. Right? And she's got this whole message of the two nations in the womb and all this. So she has this whole insight into what's happening over here. The next story is again about Rivka. It's about whether Rivka is going to be taken or not taken. Right? And the fact that the blessings happen and all this stuff. And then the third story is very clearly engineered by Rivka. This is Rivka's blessing. It's Rivka who's going to take her goats. She's the one who's going to actually feed Yitzchak ultimately, and she's going to decide who gets the bracha. And then the final kind of episode is she's the one who decides that Yaakov is going to go. But the reason she has is different to the reason she gives Yitzchak, and that Yitzchak then does. She's worried that Esau's going to, first of all, kill him, kill Yaakov. But when she actually speaks to... right? Look at this. So she in Pasuk Mem Beis, she hears Yugad Rivka Esav ben Gadol. It's told to her the words of Esav. Of course, it tells us that he's her older son because that's what it's doing all the time. And she calls Yaakov and she says, "Look, he's going to kill you. So go to my brother to Haran." But how she can actually arrange that? I can't deal with all these in-laws, these daughters-in-law that we have over here from Ches. Look at these Hittite idolatrous women. I don't want Yaakov to marry one of these. Let him go. So it's very interesting. There's always two stories going on over here. There's the story she's experiencing, the story she's giving Yitzchak, and she's generating every single process that's happening over here. So that also needs a bit of understanding. The last point I wanted to observe, which I think can now really serve as a clue to put all this together, is the actual story of the brachas of Yaakov and Esav. Because the quoted b'shem really goes back to the Zohar actually. But you could do this yourself. Just look at how thematically interlinked this whole story is with Gan Eden. First of all, as we've already described, it says, Vayarach es reach b'ni, if he smells the scent of his garment, it says, Re'ei reach b'ni, see the scent of my child is Kereach hasada sheberach Hashem, is the smell of the field that God blessed, which is Gan Eden. So he is sensing there's a Garden of Eden aspect to all this story. Now, of course, if you look at the end of the Gan Eden, the end of the Garden of Eden story, it ends with a curse. The ground will be horrible for you. And here, the point of the story is to give the blessing that's an antidote to that curse. That God should give you all the things that will work to undo that curse. So it shouldn't surprise us too much that this bracha, which is going to be the antidote to the curse for the sin of the Garden of Eden, is going to be delivered in the story where they smelled the scent of the Garden of Eden. But it goes much further than that. Because remember, at the end of the Garden of Eden story, after the sin, the eyes of both of them open. That's the end of the story. In the beginning of this story, the eyes of Yitzchak close. So there's an inverse process happening over here. It's an inversion of the Garden of Eden story. In Gan Eden, the big question was, which food are you going to eat? The food of the tree of life, the food of the tree of knowledge. Here the story is, whose food is he going to eat? The food of Esav or the food of Yaakov? And whether you do or not is going to be whether it determines bracha or klala, blessing or curse in the world. In Gan Eden, there is a voice of evil, the Nachash, the snake, and the Nachash is Aram, it's more cunning than all the beasts of the field. In this story we have Esav who's playing the same role, just like the serpent was the beast of the field, more cunning than the beasts of the field, right? Esav is always going out to hunt basada in the field. You'll notice Yaakov never goes into the field. The Nachash belongs in the field, Esav belongs in the field. Fields are quite dangerous places in the Torah. Yitzchak also goes into field. Field is the world of din. Okay, you can trace that through yourself. In stories and halachos, just do a search on one of these concordances or something and find them all. You'll see for yourself. Very, very interesting. But Yitzchak is the one who goes there. Because a field is, of course, a place of productivity where it may or may not happen. Right? If it works, it produces bracha. So people who can work with midas hadin, with the attribute of justice and so on, they, like Yitzchak, he can go and l'surch basada, pray in the field. But really, it usually belongs to the harsh people like Esav. And just like it belonged to the snake in the Garden of Eden. So in the same place. Right? Then you've got the fact that although the snake is cunning, here Esav's problem is that it's Yaakov who ends up being cunning. Ba'achicha b'mirma. Yitzchak says, no, he's undone. He's done the opposite of what the snake came with cunning and got us into trouble. He's come with cunning and got all the right blessings going on. Yaakov is, of course, playing the role of Adam Arishan. That's why he ends up walking inside his clothes, smelling of the Garden of Eden. But of course, the Gemara says Yaakov is Mein Shufar de Adam Arishan. Remember, nothing to do with this story. Yaakov is the one who expresses in his own physique and persona and soul and body Adam Arishan. They are the same person in that sense. And of course, in Gan Eden, the conduit through which things went wrong was the woman in Gan Eden, and of course, the conduit through which things go right is going to be Rivka in this story. She's going to do so. Every element of the story, and you can go into much more details of the verbs and the adjectives. There's a lot of intertextual links over here. But this is really a replay of the story of Gan Eden. And if that's the case, then we really need to think a little bit about that story to understand all the dynamics of Parashas Toldos. And there's so many aspects. You should know every single sefer in the Torah really connects back to Gan Eden. If you ever want to write a book on the Torah, you have to write a separate one just on the Seder of Bereishis. And really, because the closer something is to the beginning, the more fundamental, the more of a core it is, and the more it contains everything else. That's a big rule to know. But the aspect that's relevant for us is that Gan Eden is really the choice of man to become the center of reality. That was the fundamental choice, right? In the Garden of Eden, the snake, the Nachash says, you can be like God, you can know good and bad, you can, as the Rambam tells us, that means you can feel reality through how it feels to you. You are the center of existence. In the second chapter of the Guide to the Perplexed, you no longer see the world through emes and sheker, through a God's eye view of the world, through truth and falsehood. Now you see how it feels. Good describes it. It feels good. The pizza tastes good. We use all the words of aesthetics to describe ethics. The pizza tastes good, wonderful, beautiful, or horrible, revolting, and disgusting. And moral acts are good, wonderful, beautiful, horrible, revolting, and disgusting. Right? It's the same language because they really all talk about how they make us feel. So if someone makes me feel good, they're good. If they make me feel bad, they are bad. And that's the bubble we're trapped in. We've spoken about this in other contexts. The issue of being a Tolda, of being a continuity, lies in the shadow of last week's Sedra, Chaye Sarah. And because you have to see the big flow, the big picture of what's been moving through the Torah. Chaye Sarah was an incredible moment. Sarah dies. The whole Sedra is called after her life, even though it begins with her death. But what's even more intriguing is what is it that causes her death? The significance of her death, the Torah doesn't give us any particular indication of why she dies, what happens, any information that there's anyone expecting her death. But the juxtaposition of her death straight after the Akeida leads Chazal to suggest there is a link between the two. And the link is that it's the news of the Akeida that kills her. And it's expressed in three different ways in three different midrashim. Medrash number one, I forget which one, there's two Medrash rabbis, I think there's a Pirkei of Eliezer, I think it is, maybe it's a Rabbi Tanchumer, I don't remember off the top of my head. One Medrash says the story that we all expect, that there was the Satan, this satanic force gives her this image, and she sees and realizes it's a true prophecy, a true vision. She sees Avram standing over the tied up Yitzchak with a knife ready to kill him, and she dies. And that we could understand. She dies of the shock. Here we waited all the decades of our life to have this child, and this is what's going on, and she can't live. There's a second version. It says that the Satan gave her the image, and she sees Avram poised with a knife about to shecht him, and then she sees him stop, and then she dies, which raises one sec, but there's a worse, I think this is the Pirkei of Eliezer, has even the more difficult version. Yitzchak comes home, and Yitzchak knocks on the tent and says, Mommy, you'll never guess what nearly happened to me. She hears the story and she dies. On that version, why'd she die? I mean, it might be horrible, but she knows, on the first version, she thinks she's about to see her son die, so she leaves the world, she can't take it. On the third version, she knows the end of the story. He's here. He didn't die. She might want to go and scream at Avram, what are you doing? But why would she die as a result of the story? The Pachad Yitzchak of Rav Hutner has in two places where he discusses this, and he says something so profound. He says, we are born with an existential illusion that we have a right to exist. And if we think deeply, and this really, Rosh Hashanah is actually about this every year, we come face to face, if we thought deeply enough, with our own Creator, who on every Rosh Hashanah says, why should you even live? And we kind of have this shattering of the illusion that we have a right to existence. And we realize that we actually cannot justify our existence. We might think we can, but we actually can't. It doesn't matter how good we are. It doesn't matter how much better we're going to be in a future year. There is nothing we can say and nothing we can do that could compel the infinite creator of the universe to need to create us. God can want to need us, but he cannot need us. He's infinite. He doesn't need anything. Meaning he can create a desire, and that desire needs us to fulfill it. Fine. But he could terminate that desire at any point. And therefore we have no right to exist and no justification for our existence. And if a person became real with that, we can say the words and nod and whatever, okay, fine. But if I was real with this, if any of us were real with this, we would be frozen. We would struggle to exist. The message of the Akeida was, you do not have a right to exist. Your creator can decide at any point to take you away and can insist your biological creator takes you away. And there's nothing you could do against that. We can have moral principles against one another. Because you need empathy, I need empathy for you. You can't have it against the being who's thinking you into existence. I can think a world into existence. They've all got to behave themselves. If any moment I decide to stop having them in the world, there's no moral claim to me to keep thinking them into existence. There's no moral claim anybody has on God. God, you can't do this. I need to live. Who are you exactly? You're a figment of God's imagination. He can terminate you how he wants, when he wants. There's absolutely no obligation. And Sarah becomes so aware of this at a core existential position that she actually stops existing. And the rest of the whole of Bereishis and the whole of Torah takes place in the shadow of that stab at the core of our fundamental cherished assumption. And now we've got to live in a world where we are haunted by the shadow of the fact that we have no right to exist. And the replacement of sorrow comes along is Rivka. And out of Rivka, who steps into the shoes of sorrow, who says, I will continue life where you left off. But that she really becomes Sarah. I mean, that's the point, right? That if you look in last week's Sedra, when she comes back into the tent, just before Shishi, right, that in Pasuk 120, and so page 120, Pasuk Samach Vav, right, chapter 24, 66, so 67, Yitzchak brought her into the tent, Sarah Imai, which by the way, the Rishonim should even read it, the tent of Sarah. Either you could even read it, the tent, and she is Sarah, whichever way. Yitzchak was comforted after his mother. She is now Sarah, and the Medrash brings that all the brachos Sarah had returned. So she is going to be the Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. Rivka is the continuation of Sarah. But Rivka is now going to have this struggle inside her because there's two possible pathways in the continuity of Sarah. Here is how it works. Both Esav and Yaakov are going to be born in this crisis. And they're going to be raised with this question that is over their heads, consciously or not. They're going to have to respond to it. And Esav's response is this: I want to own my existence. I want to own my existence. I want to earn my right to life. And so the Medrash says, I mean, Rashi quotes it, when he would hunt, his father loved him because he had hunting in his mouth. There are different ways to understand that pasuk. But Rashi quotes the Tzayid B'Fif, he would hunt him, trap him with his mouth, with Esau's mouth. He would try to sound so religious. He'd say, how do I take Maisa from Melech? How do I tithe salt? Well, you can't. Okay, but what's really going on? What's going on is he's trying to pay God. How much do I pay God and then I can have my own right to life? And of course he's trying to pay his father. How do I pay my father? Because I owe him the debt of gratitude. If you ask an English speaker, or probably in other cultures, I'm sure it's the same thing, should you honor parents? It's a universe. Obviously you should honor parents. Why should you honor parents? And you get words like gratitude, or we're indebted to them, we have a debt of gratitude. Do you realize on a subconscious level how damaging that is? I should note that Rav Dessler does point about that there is an aspect that we should focus on, but it's not the predominant aspect, and I'll tell you why. Because when you have a debt, when you owe someone money, how do you feel about them?
Stressed.
They make you, right. On the one hand, you're grateful they gave you. On the other hand, you're stressed, you're a bit resentful, you wish you didn't have to. And that is a subconscious psychological set of complex emotional relations lots of people have with their parents. On the one hand, thank you for giving me life and looking after me. On the other hand, I resent the domineering presence you have. I resent the inequality in the relationship in which everything is the subtext of I raised you and changed your nappies and did all these, sent you to school. There's a complex relationship. When we feel it as a debt, it's not so simple. And it's not a contradiction, therefore, for Esav to honor his father in gold, in golden clothes, royal clothes, give him whatever he wants. He's honoring his father because he wants to pay off the debt of gratitude. But he resents him. He can't speak nicely to him. Get up, Dad. Eat already. Can you give me the blessing? Can I actually earn this thing? There's that feeling going on. But we can still learn kibbud from Esav, because the mitzvah of kibbud is actually a technical mitzvah. There's two mitzvahs of honoring parents. Kibbud, which is technical, making sure they're fed and looked after and so on, and moira of having awe. Within them both is meant to be an attitude which we'll come to, of a very positive attitude. Esav doesn't have the positive attitude. You can learn from his action, but you can hear in his voice, in what he says, this is not coming from love. This is coming from a complex relationship, but he will honor his father. Absolutely. He will look after him. He will do the things for him. That's what he's going to do. Where's Yaakov coming from? And Esav's, therefore, entire worldview is, how can I earn my existence? Even the word Esav means made. He's completely made, right? Amazingly enough, he doesn't try and do kibbud aim. We don't see any evidence of honoring his mother. In fact, we never even see him speaking to his mother. Once in the whole Torah. He hears his mother doesn't like it doesn't bother him, his mother doesn't like his wives. His father doesn't, he can't deal with that. Possibly because the suggestion is that, I think I heard this from Rabbi Weinberg, who used to give Sherman in the Old City, was a relative of Renach, that you can't. You can pay for your this is what I'm about to tell you is definitely from him. In a minute I'll tell you, but this is what I'm about to say right now. I think it was from him as well. Is that you can't pay. And there's a Pirkei Rav Eliezer I think it's a Pirkei Rav Eliezer that says Esav actually destroyed his mother on the way out. That's why she can have no more children. That's why she never had any more children afterwards. Meaning, whatever that medrash means, it's saying that he cuts himself off from his mother. In his midrashim play on the fact he never needed his mother. He came out already with his hair and his teeth, and whether that's literal or not, the point is that what we're seeing is somebody who in their mind is cut off from his mother, tries to pay off God, tries to pay off his father, wants himself. And we'll see as that develops in the Torah, the aspects of where that goes to. But of course, it makes sense that such a person would hate the birthright. I don't want to have something because I'm born into it. I want to be me. I want to be who I am. Yaakov has a completely different attitude. Yaakov's attitude is, I will never buy my existence. My life will never be mine. All that I am will never be mine. Instead, and if you look at the Sefer HaChinuch, when it brings how you're meant to have the mitzvah kibbud avei, mitzvah honoring parents, it brings hakoras hatov. What's hakoras hatov mean? It's not the same as the English gratitude, and certainly not indebtedness. It literally means awareness of the good. Awareness means I'm conscious. I'm conscious that my life is a gift from my parents. I'm conscious it is a gift from previous generations. I'm conscious it is a gift from history. I'm conscious it is a gift from God himself. And I never try to make it mine. Mine belongs to them and not me. And like any loan, it'll be taken from me. That's a mission in Pirkei Avos. The life is like a loan. And, except the one thing that is yours when you get a loan is what you do with the investment, that you keep. What is ours in our life is not our life. You'll never own that. What is ours are the choices we make. They are ours and they are ours forever. And that's Yaakov's attitude. And when you have that, there's no threat. My parents owning my life, in a certain sense, isn't a threat to what's mine. And so all of a sudden, and we'll see Yaakov will develop this further and further through the Torah, where what he has is never a threat to anybody else and vice versa. That's going to be thematic. Especially by the time you get to Vayetze and some degree Vayishlach, especially in Vayishlach, we'll see all this, Mi'at Hashem. But the point is that Yaakov is coming from this whole other world, where Yaakov loves his past. He's got a great relationship with his mother. He loves his father. He may not do as crazy level of honor as Esav, but he's coming from a world where what honors his parents, what's his, is what he does with his life. And he's the Ishtam Yeshiva Halim, he's trying to develop himself and all that kind of stuff. And that shifts, and that becomes the essence of what a Toldos is. If a bracha is going to genuinely work at a multi-generational level, it will require people who perceive themselves as expressions of the past. such that what they bring to the world now, the choices they do, creates a new future. And then each link in the chain is on the one hand totally embedded in the past, and on the other hand totally new in what it can create. And they are one and the same. That is a Tolda. And that is why when he smells the scent, the Medrash says he smelt Yosef Meshisa, means he sensed that even within Yaakov, even if he messes up, and he will, his descendants can mess up, but there's such a subconscious attachment, a sense of identity that is built out of the past, that in the traumatic moment when he enters the base of Mikdash, something triggers inside him that he's not even conscious of. Something just awakens and says, I can't do this. I can't rebel against who I am. I can't keep running away from what my core is, my connection to my Creator and centuries of the past. This is my identity. I wasn't even conscious of it. I thought I'm a rebel. I thought I'm an anti-Jew. But it's actually who I am. And Yitzchak says, if that's what's in front of me, then whoever's in front of me needs this bracha. That's the one who must be the continuity. So this gives us a bit. I'm just checking the time, and we're out of time. I apologize. I think we've gone a little bit over. But so hopefully there's a point to stop. But it allows hopefully also more research as we look further and further into this Sedra and its multiple layers and all the things going on. But in Mitzvah should be something that hopefully we can really aspire to understand when we're reading the Sedra. We're reading who we are and what all this means for us. And Hashem should help all of us to be the Toldos of Yisrael.